and the Gestapo was once the most feared secret police in Europe, a shadowy force that enforced Nazi rule through intimidation and control. When the Third Reich collapsed, its leaders scattered, and the organization itself was branded a criminal organization. Yet the question lingered, what became of the men who ran it? Some stood trial as others vanished, and one Heinrich Müller, the Gestapo's chief, seemed to disappear into thin air. And in the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany crumbled under the weight of defeat. As Allied forces advanced into Berlin, the Gestapo, once the regime's most feared secret police, ceased to exist as an organized body. And the institution which had relied on the Nazi state for power and legitimacy dissolved in a matter of weeks. Its officers fled, attempted to blend into civilian life, or surrendered to advancing armies. And for the Allies, the Gestapo symbolized the machinery of repression, and dismantling it was a top priority. In June 1945, the Allied Control Council formally abolished all Nazi organizations, including the Gestapo, and their offices were closed, records were seized, and former officials were detained. Thousands of Gestapo files recovered from destroyed headquarters in Berlin and other cities became evidence for prosecutors preparing war crimes trials, and these documents revealed the depth of the Gestapo's involvement in political persecution, forced labor, and the deportations that fed the Nazi camp system. The Allies recognized quickly that this was not an ordinary police force. It had been an arm of state terror. At the Nuremberg trials, which opened in November 1945, the Gestapo was placed on trial not as a collection of individuals, but as an institution. Alongside the SS and the Sicherheitsdienst (SD), it was declared a criminal organization. The prosecution argued that anyone who had been part of the Gestapo shared responsibility for crimes committed under its authority. And the most senior Gestapo leader in Allied custody, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, stood as the chief representative. As head of the Reich Main Security Office, he was held accountable for the actions carried out by its agents. Kaltenbrunner's trial revealed the breadth of Gestapo operations, from interrogations and executions to the deportation of Jews and resistance members. The evidence against him included both documents and testimony from survivors. And in October 1946, he was sentenced to death and executed, the highest-ranking Gestapo figure to face justice. His conviction cemented the Gestapo's reputation as a criminal body, but it also raised questions about how far responsibility extended. Was every clerk or secretary equally guilty, or only those who gave the orders? And in practice, denazification efforts varied across occupied zones. Some low-ranking Gestapo employees faced internment and questioning, while others slipped back into society with little notice. And local tribunals struggled with the sheer number of cases. Many former officials claimed they were merely following orders or performing routine police work, and the Allies lacked the capacity to prosecute everyone, so decisions were often pragmatic. Some were punished severely, others quietly resumed careers in post-war Germany. What is clear is that by the end of 1946, the Gestapo was no longer a functioning body, but a disbanded organization remembered primarily for its role in sustaining Nazi power. And if the Gestapo as an institution was dismantled in 1945, its most senior surviving leader left behind one of the great mysteries of the post-war era. Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo since 1939, was last seen in Berlin in the final days of the Third Reich. While other leaders met their ends clearly, Müller seemed to vanish without a trace. Müller was present in Hitler's bunker during the collapse. Witnesses recalled him discussing the regime's fate and refusing to flee. After Hitler's death on 30th April, the bunker emptied, but Müller's movements remain uncertain. Some testified he left the Reich Chancellery to fight on in Berlin, while others claimed they saw his body among the dead, none of which was ever confirmed. For Allied investigators, Müller became a prime target. He had overseen operations against resistance groups, coordinated deportations, and directed the Gestapo's brutal enforcement system. Capturing him could have revealed much about Nazi repression, but despite massive intelligence efforts, no verified trace was found. Rumors suggested escape to South America or recruitment by a foreign service, but none were ever substantiated. And in 2013, historian Johannes Tuchel announced that documents indicated Mueller's body was discovered in May 1945 near the Luftwaffe ministry and reburied in a mass grave at a Jewish cemetery in Berlin. If true, the man who orchestrated persecution ended up in the ground of a community his institution targeted. Not all historians are convinced, arguing the evidence remains circumstantial. Whether he died in Berlin or escaped, he remains a symbol of the Gestapo's power and the ambiguities of post-war justice. While Heinrich Mueller's fate remained uncertain, the story of other Gestapo officials was far less mysterious. Across Europe, Allied authorities and local governments put hundreds of officers on trial, yet the outcomes varied widely from death sentences to short prison terms, and in some cases freedom, after only a few years. In Norway, Helmuth Reinhard, who headed the Gestapo, was notorious for his harsh interrogations. After the war, he managed to disappear into the chaos of a defeated Germany for nearly 2 decades. And in 1967, a West German court sentenced him to 5 years in prison, a surprisingly light punishment given his record. He was released in 1970 and lived quietly until his death in 2002. And other trials ended more dramatically. Rudolf Christoph Batz initially escaped scrutiny and practiced law in post-war Hamburg until 1960. Facing charges for his role in deportations and killings, Batz was arrested. And in 1961, shortly before his trial began, he took his own life in custody. Rudolf Kerner, who led the Gestapo in Kristiansand, was sentenced to death in 1947. Yet political shifts led to a commutation to life imprisonment. Just 6 years later, in 1953, Kerner was released and returned to West Germany, where he lived as an ordinary shoe salesman. And this reflects the leniency that became common during the 1950s, as Cold War priorities shifted attention away from punishing former Nazis. And the mixed results of these prosecutions reveal a stark reality. Only a fraction of Gestapo personnel ever faced lasting consequences. For many victims, this lack of comprehensive justice was a bitter reminder that the end of the war did not erase the scars left by Nazi terror. While the Gestapo vanished as an institution, its methods of surveillance, intimidation, and political policing did not disappear. Instead, they shaped debates about how a modern democracy could prevent state power from sliding back into tyranny. And in West Germany, public memory developed slowly. Practical concerns, rebuilding infrastructure, and resisting Soviet influence took precedence. Some ex-Gestapo employees even re-entered police work under the new German Republic. Historians still argue whether this was a necessary compromise in the Cold War environment. In East Germany, the story took a different turn. The Ministry for State Security, known as the Stasi, became the regime's own secret police. While ideologically different, the Stasi borrowed heavily from Gestapo methods, cultivating informants, monitoring citizens, and crushing dissent. For many, this reinforced the idea that authoritarian surveillance had simply changed uniforms. Over time, scholarship has reshaped our understanding. Recent research suggests the Gestapo was not just all-powerful, but relied heavily on denunciations from ordinary citizens. Its effectiveness often lay in the willingness of neighbors to turn on one another. Day memorials like the Topography of Terror Museum in Berlin document the institution and its crimes. Education programs seek to ensure that the memory of repression serves as a warning against authoritarianism in the present. Though the Gestapo ended in 1945, it remains one of the starkest reminders of how a modern state can twist law enforcement into an instrument of fear. Well, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out